Hello, everyone. We will start the conference in a minute. This is a great time to mute your phone. We will be taking questions either directly to individuals or to the group as a whole via the cards at your seat. Please write legibly so I can read them. And Cecily will bring them up to me while we're having our interviews. Thanks. Hello, thank you all for coming here or for joining us online. And thank you to those who helped organize this press briefing, including our press freedom consultant, Bill McCarran, our executive director, Didier Saji, our membership director, Kate Helster, and our membership events and program coordinator, Cecily Scott Martin, and various Wall Street Journal staff. I'm Eileen O'Reilly, and I'm the president of the National Press Club and the managing editor of Standards and Training at Axios. More than 100 days ago, a young reporter for the Wall Street Journal was unjustly detained by Russian security forces while he was working on one of his many stories. Evan Gershkovich is fully credentialed by the Russian government to be in Russia and to engage in journalism. There's no dispute about this. He's being held in jail for doing the professional journalism activities that the Russian government explicitly condoned by written credential. Evan's detention was done in bad faith and against both international norms and Russia's own best practices for foreign journalists. Not since the Cold War has Russia so brazenly suspended its own practices toward a US journalist. We at the National Press Club find this behavior on the part of the Russian government appalling and cruel, and we call for Evan's immediate release. With roughly 3,000 members representing nearly all major journalism networks and dispensing numerous journalism awards and press freedom accolades over the past 116 years, I think we are pretty good at determining good journalism. It is clear to me, anyway, that Evan was acting as a journalist. Suggestions to the contrary are simply rubbish. Today, we have a panel that will brief us all on Evan's case and report on what is being done by his employer, his family, and his legal team to bring him home. We also have someone who's been through a similar situation, a journalist who had been unjustly detained in Iran and then released. We will first hear from each of the panelists to get the latest, and then we'll take as many of your questions as we can get to. We received several via email, and for those here in person, please write them on the cards and pass them to Cecily.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Paul Beckett. I'm the Washington Bureau Chief of the Wall Street Journal. Welcome to you all. We appreciate you coming, and we appreciate you taking interest in Evan's case and Evan's story. I would like to thank the National Press Club, Eileen, Bill, Didier, Cecily, Kate, and the whole team here. We could do a whole separate briefing on how the NPC has responded so helpfully to our difficult situation with Evan. So our sincere thanks to them, not just for today, but for everything else that they have done. As you know, our colleague Evan Gershkovich was apprehended by Russian security services on March 29th. He was falsely accused and thrown in a Moscow prison when he was doing his duties as a Wall Street Journal reporter, and only his duties as one of our Russian correspondents. Since then, the Journal, Evan's friends, and the journalistic community here internationally, along with the US government and other governments around the world, have condemned Evan's wrongful imprisonment, as well as Russia's criminalization of independent, trustworthy, deeply reported, and expert journalism. Last Friday, we passed the difficult milestone of Evan's 100 days in detention, a very tough day, especially for Evan, for his family, his colleagues, and his friends. It was tempered by the warmth and intensity of the support that we received from so many corners of the country and the world, including, I'm sure, from your own outlets, from your viewers, your readers, your listeners, and we're extremely grateful for all of that. Evan will return to our newsroom, and he will continue his stellar career. But even in the days since he's been detained, we have missed his reporting and authoritative insights into Russia at such a crucial time for all of us to understand the country, who governs it, how its economy works, and its people, all of which were specialties of Evan's reporting. That void has been amplified by the hostility that Russia and other regimes around the world have shown to journalists trying to do their jobs to bring independent, fact-based reporting to the world. And we're all the poorer for that absence. Thank you for coming, and we appreciate your being here, and we look forward to the conversation.
My name is Jay Conti. I'm the General Counsel at Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal. Thanks to the National Press Club and everybody else who's shown an interest in Evan's case. As a press lawyer, there is no worse situation than having one of your reporters' freedom taken away for simply doing their job. We've been working on this for over 100 days, and there's no easy playbook for this kind of scenario. Talk a little bit about what the company's been doing. There's sort of four main focus areas. As you'd expect, the first is Russia and Evan's health and well-being. That's, of course, top of the list. So there's the legal case in Russia and his taken care of. Actually, those kind of go hand in hand. We have very brave lawyers on the ground who are both his lawyers, but also the people who get in to see Evan most regularly. And we're deeply grateful for the work that they've done up until this point. They're the most regular contact Evan has with the outside world, and they're also great lawyers. So the Russian legal system is a bit opaque, as you would imagine. Evan was taken, accused of having state secrets, not a lot of additional details. In the Russian system, there's a long investigatory period that can be extended, and it gets extended in periods of 2, 3, or 4 months. So that's what you've seen over the last 100+ days. There have been multiple hearings. There's a hearing to decide whether or not he should be continued to be detained. We ask for him to be released, home arrests, those kinds of things. That gets denied. Then we appeal. That gets denied. So at this stage, Evan's detention is set until August 30th, and then we will see another hearing at that time, probably another appeal. And at some point, as this continues, there will in fact be a trial. Trials in Russia are not public when it comes to these kinds of charges, and so we won't know a whole lot and won't be able to get a whole lot of information out of Russia on the trial itself. So that's the first bucket, and of course a critically important bucket. The second bucket for the company is something I didn't spend a whole lot of time thinking about before this case, which is private diplomacy. In a scenario like this, you hire a law firm like WilmerHale that does great work, and you try and figure out, how can we assist? How can we assist the U.S. government? They've been on it. Really appreciative to the State Department and to the administration and to SPIHA in particular for spearheading the efforts. Evan was quickly designated as wrongfully detained, and that was obviously useful and unlocks the efforts of SPIHA. But there's lots of other efforts that go on into that kind of private diplomacy bucket where you try and run down every path you possibly can to try and get your colleague out of prison. Third bucket is communications, and appreciate the assistance with sort of the press around the world, because there's been real interest in this case for obvious reasons, and it takes an effort to make sure that folks continue to know that this case is going on. You don't want a situation where someone says, oh, is he still in prison? Yeah, he's still in prison, and it's a gut punch every single day, and it's upsetting every single day. So it's not just something that happens in the background. This isn't a Netflix show. This is real life. And then the fourth is trying to assist Evan's family, his incredible mom and dad and sister and brother-in-law and whatever they need. Not that we're experts in any of that, but we're humans and want to be able to support them as best we can. So that's kind of how we set up trying to deal with this on the company level. And one thing I just wanted to mention before passing it on is, when something like this happens, Jason had a great piece this week about how terrible it is what happened to Evan, but also the dangers that journalists now face and continue to face around the world. And you start thinking about what happens in this kind of scenario. First thing is, the reporting out of Russia suffers. There are far fewer reporters in Russia. We don't have as much information out of Russia. Major life and world events like the Wagner Group happen, and we don't know as much about it. So that's an immediate consequence. But the second one is, you start wondering if other countries look at what happened in Russia and say, well, is there a real consequence to having detained Evan in this scenario? And if there isn't a real consequence, maybe this is something that we ought to consider. And that puts great pressure on journalists around the world. For that reason, and Jason had said we need to think of a different approach. This may not be a magical approach, but one possible approach is to use the system we have already, which is the wrongful detention system. And anytime a journalist or somebody who's engaging in news gathering is picked up around the world, SPIHA would have an accelerated process to figure out whether or not that person is wrongfully detained. And if they are designated as wrongfully detained, having been in the service of journalism, there would be automatic requirements to issue sanctions against the country that took them. Sanctions against anybody who was involved in the case, as well as a travel ban of any of those individuals who come into the United States. If we were to set up a system like that, and the rule could be those sanctions will snap back the minute that the individual is released and therefore safe. If we could set up a system like that on the back of what we already have, which is the great SPIHA system and the wrongful detention system, but with this added element of saying, we believe in a free press. It's core to who we are as a society. And so we need to do something immediate when this happens to try and act as a deterrent. If we set that up and we go to other countries that also benefit from and support a robust and free press, and we have reciprocity, and all of those nations decide to do sanctions when something like this happens, it could send a real message that you don't mess with journalists who are on the ground doing good reporting and nothing more.
My name is Jason Rezayan. I'm an opinions writer for the Washington Post. 9 years ago, next week, I had been the Washington Post bureau chief in Tehran for over 2 years when my wife and I were arrested from our home at gunpoint, taken to Evin prison in Tehran. I spent the next year and a half of my life there, facing a very similar ordeal to what Evan is going through right now. I wasn't here, obviously, for the advocacy around my case, but a lot of it happened right here in this room with many of the people who are here today. Bill McCarran, David Bowker from WilmerHale. But there's other resources now. Jay talked about the SPIHA office, the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs. Members of that staff are here today. And I've watched over the last 7 years since I was released how the machinery around the detention, wrongful detention, hostage taking of American citizens and in particular American journalists, has evolved. The instances of this crime and this really unique human rights abuse that's directed solely at an individual has grown exponentially, but also the resources to combat it are more developed than they've ever been before. And so when I heard about Evan's arrest back in March, within minutes I was on the phone with colleagues from the Wall Street Journal. That's not something that's really normal in our business. And I wanted to break the taboo on that. I don't know Evan yet, but I know what he's going through. And I know that it takes a coordinated effort from a lot of different corners, including throughout the media, to really amplify this kind of case. And so without permission and without an invitation, I tried to make myself available to the Journal. Paul and Jay both talked about there not being a playbook. I think that we're developing one, and I think it's one that we can develop together and share with others. And I echo both Paul and Jay's sentiments about the need for more robust action against states that do this to journalists. And I'll be an active ally in that process.
Hi, I'm Danielle Grishkovich. I'm Evan's older sister. He calls me his little sister now because he's a lot taller than me. And I just want to thank all of you for being here. I know as journalists you have a personal stake in what happens in Evan's case. And just thank you so much. Thank you to Wall Street Journal. Thank you to Jason for helping to support someone in Evan's position. And of course, thank you to everyone else who's involved in Evan's case.
Thank you. Dana, let's start with you. So can you tell us a little bit about what this whole process has been like for you since you heard the news and what you hope happens going forward?
I just try to take it day by day. Mm-hmm. It still feels unreal sometimes. Yeah. So for my parents, it's a full-time job. We're just trying to. There's not really a lot for us to know, but we're just trying to, learn everything that we can, and just try to mostly stay strong. Try to keep the spotlight on Evan's case.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, Jason, for 100 days, do you remember how that felt for you and where your head was then? What do you imagine Evan is going through right now? Did you mark the time in some way?
Take the last part first. Mark the time in the cliche way that you see in the movies. I mean, that's a cliche for a reason. 4 marks and a diagonal line through it. I think at 100 days, your reality has set in. And I say that because in the first days and weeks, it's very unclear what's happening. It's confusing. It's designed to be confusing. Mm-hmm. You're not sure what to believe, who to believe, and you don't have a lot of access, if any, to the outside world. But as you reach several months and then potentially longer, the question became for me, not can I survive this, whatever this is, but am I going to get old in here, right? Yeah. And I think you go through many peaks and valleys. Mm-hmm. All I know of Evan is what I've read, what I've heard from friends, colleagues, family members, and the pictures that we've seen of him. And from having sat in his shoes at one point, I think what I see reflects somebody who is very well aware of his circumstances, hopefully aware about the great fight that's being put up for him in the outside world. And really, frankly, hopefully someone who understands the real absurdity of what he's being subjected to.
When you were in prison, how often were you asked to write something or sign a confession or take that kind of action?
In the early days, weeks, and months, on a daily basis.
Oh.
When I was taken to court, every single time. Iran is what they call an Islamic republic. The law is rooted in the Quran. And my response over time when I was asked to confess, it would be a sin against God to lie and confess to things I didn't do. You have to find ways to zig and zag through a very difficult process, a very large and imposing process, when all tools of power are being directed squarely at trying to hurt you. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, what you realize is that whether you confess to something you did or didn't do, you have no bearing over what is going to happen to you. It's forces on the outside and the lengths to which that they're willing to go to bat for you. Unfortunately, in Evan's case, we see an employer, a family, a community of colleagues around the world who have raised their voices, our voices, singularly, individually, and collectively, and will continue to do so until he comes home.
Mm-hmm. You've written a lot about press freedom around the world and what trends are happening with autocratic regimes. Can you tell us, do you feel like this is a big what is the big picture as far as, you see this increasing, this type of hostage taking?
Yeah, it's obvious that it's been increasing.
Yep.
I think what we have to be very careful about is the reality that doing this kind of work is becoming almost impossible in a growing number of countries around the world. I think the big three would be China, Russia, and Iran at this point. But there are other authoritarian states, authoritarian-leaning states, democracies on the brink that are looking at the lack of accountability, the impunity with which these governments are doing this to journalists, and thinking that it's a good model to shut down dissent. So I think we're going to deal with a wave of this, and we better be ready. And we better be ready to combat it together, because if we lose windows into societies like the ones I just mentioned, we will be much worse off in terms of our ability to stay informed, but also our ability to understand a world that's fast evolving and the security risks that may be directed at us very soon.
True. So this one looks like it's for either Paul or Jay. Have you gotten any indication that the Russians would be willing to negotiate a deal before Evan's trial plays out?
Yeah, the line that has been said is that he has to be convicted before there's a deal of some sort. There is nothing in Russian law that requires that. So I don't think we can read into anything necessarily, but there's nothing that requires us to wait till there's a conviction before there can be a deal. And so there's full court press to try and figure out how to get him out as soon as possible.
And for Danielle, has your family had any contact with the Whalen family?
No, but our hearts go out to any family who's dealing with something like this, and we just want all Americans who are unjustly detained abroad to be brought back home.
Some of these are funny. Okay. Danielle, tell us a little bit more about Evan on a more personal basis. What kind of relationship did you two have? Have you gotten a letter from him while he's in prison?
I actually got a letter from you yesterday. I get them about once a week, and it just totally changes my mood. I was a classic bossy older sister growing up.
You and me both.
Yeah, but as we've gotten older, we've become friends, and I really miss him. Not only is he just so talented, but he's a great listener. He gives the best presents. He just somehow sees into your soul, and yeah, he would be the person I'd be talking to make sense of all this right now. So yeah, really miss him.
What's your favorite present?
He got me this book, The Vegetarian. He's really good at picking out books, and I loved it. I really felt like he knew me and all the kind of weird, dark things I'm into.
Oh, that's great. Okay, that's good. How do you get the letters? Are they emailed to you, or is it?
It's like a magical process. I'll get a picture of them.
Oh,
so I
okay.
read them.
Okay, interesting. For you as well, much has been made of his sense of humor. Was he funny as a kid? Can you tell us some things he did when you were growing up that made you laugh?
I've been thinking about our childhood a lot, and I wish I could pinpoint more specific examples, but there's something you'll see in his eyes as an adult now. It's just this mischievous glint that he still has from childhood. So he's just, he has a serious side to him. He's really driven and hardworking, and he's always been that way since he was a kid. But yeah, he's, like I said, I was bossy, so I'd say, we're gonna do this, and he would just do it with me. So we'd climb trees, we'd put on shows for our parents. He was always down to do whatever I'd come up with.
Great. And what is your feeling as to how he's coping with all of this?
I'm so proud of him. I'm sure most of you have seen the video of him talking to my parents in the courtroom, just that little glimpse of it, and just to see him waving his hands in such a familiar way and making them laugh. I'm just so proud of him. I don't know how he's staying so brave, but it means I have to stay brave for him too.
Yeah, all of us, I think. So for Jay, do you anticipate Evan will be convicted and transferred to a labor camp situation? Do you think because of his profession and high profile, he might eventually be transferred to a kind of house arrest situation pending trial?
Listen, it's hard to speculate. It's Russia, but if you're
Yeah.
using past cases as a guide, barring a deal that comes together, the case goes to trial. Won't see much into the trial. The conviction rate is basically 100%. So there's not a whole lot of ability to maneuver in that kind of a system. I think start to finish, Paul Whelan was a 17-month period from the beginning of detention, investigation, and then trial. And then he, of course, went off to a work camp. Hard to know exactly what it would look like, but they claim these are state secrets, and this is an espionage charge, and so it's the highest kind of crime. And so home detention is unlikely, given that we've been fighting for home detention during the investigatory phase, where, of course, he hadn't been convicted of anything and haven't been able to pull that off. But the real goal here, obviously, is to try and short circuit all of that and get him released as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm. Also for you, is there a limit to the amount of pretrial detention under Russian law, or can he be held indefinitely without charges?
Can't be held indefinitely. Generally, the system is 12 months, but that can be extended in extraordinary circumstances, undefined as to what qualifies as an extraordinary circumstance, for an additional 6 months in theory, and some have said even longer. So you could stretch out an investigatory period for 18 months and longer if need be. So it's a difficult system with not a lot of insight, even to us, because anybody who's involved in the process themselves is governed by an NDA and can't share the details. So it's a very, very closed process that makes it quite difficult to impact on strategy or on details in any meaningful way. But as I say, we do have a very good team in Russia, a very brave team in Russia that's taken this case on, and we're deeply, deeply grateful for that.
Is there any benefit on the Russian side to postpone the trial itself or delay it?
Some have said that, depends on your perspective, he's in Le Fort-de-Vaux prison, which is not a great place to be, but there are other options. And so some have said if you prefer to stay in Le Fort-de-Vaux prison, then having the investigatory period extend as long as possible is a benefit. But I don't think there's really very many benefits to dragging this process out, where I think most people suspect they know where this is going to end if it has to go through the formal process.
Okay. And also for you, Jay, sorry. Can you describe for us Evan's legal team now? How many in-house lawyers are on it? How many outside counsel? And he has Russian lawyers in court.
Yeah, there's a large team that's supporting this effort. The firm is ZKS in Russia. There's 2 lawyers there who are doing this work on the ground. We hired a lawyer in the United States, Tom Firestone at Strzok, who had been in Russia for a number of years and is helping. I call it translate. I don't mean by language. I mean helps explain the Russian legal system and the process, and occasionally translates, to act as kind of an intermediary. And then we have hired Wilmer Hale in the United States to help on all this various private diplomacy, as I called it, Ambassador Bob Kimmett and Dave Bowker and team. There are 10 plus folks on that team who are assisting us on the legal side. And then internally at the Wall Street Journal, there's myself and Jake Goldstein and Craig Linder, who are my 2 colleagues who do media work. The 3 of us are deeply involved in this case every single day, and a number of other people who come in and do a variety of different things that are needed as well on the Journal team. Then on the comms team, we've brought in an outside full-time person. She used to be our head of comms, Ashley Houston. We also hired Brunswick, which gives communication support on that side as well. So there's a variety of folks who are helping to support this effort. There is no higher priority than trying to get Evan freed. The frustrating part, which it's hard to describe it, it's like lots and lots of action, unclear how much progress.
Right.
And that's wildly frustrating for everybody, for the person who's sitting in prison wondering what's going on, for the family that wants to know how to move this forward, for the employer that wants to get their employee out. It's a deeply frustrating process to the U.S. government that's putting tremendous effort into this case as well. The process is difficult, and you don't know you've made progress until all of a sudden you've made progress. That's not how most things work, so it's a challenge.
Okay. Paul, do you have a feeling as to, like, when was the last time somebody from your company was able to talk to him directly, and how is he doing that you know?
More for you, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there isn't really, other than letters,
Okay.
there isn't a lot of contact with Evan. Our Russian lawyers are able to get on a regular basis. We're, again, deeply appreciative for that. They're able to spend a lot of time with them, with Evan in prison. Ambassador Tracy has been able to get in to see Evan on 2 occasions, most recently on July 3rd, so that's good. But aside from those 2 groups, he's not really able to see or hear from other folks.
Okay.
There's no phone calls, there's no in-person visits other than the consular visits and the outside lawyers. It's just not possible.
Is the 2 ambassador visits, that seems rather low? Is that?
Listen, I'm not the expert on this. I have heard from folks that there have been cases where there were long stretches where there were no ambassador visits. So the first visit was April 17th, and so that was deemed, I think, relatively quick, even though it didn't feel quick to us because it was nearly 3 weeks. Then there was a long period where there were no consular visits. Russia said it was because the U.S. denied visas to journalists who were traveling with their foreign minister. And so they denied 3 different consular visits during that period, which was an exceedingly frustrating stretch. And then this most recent visit was on July 3rd. So I do think they would be more frequent if they were allowed. The requests certainly are more frequent. It's just at the whim of the folks who grant or deny those things.
Yeah. Okay. For Jay, were you surprised that prosecutors did not show any evidence of the bail hearing or the extension of detention hearing? Is that common in these kinds of national security cases?
Yeah, for the national security cases, you're really not gonna see much. You don't know what happens behind closed doors. They make a very small period of it public sometimes, and so the lack of evidence is not particularly surprising. It also wouldn't be surprising if there were something that was shown to the press at some point for some strategic reason. That wouldn't surprise me either. So I think you have to really keep your eyes open on this. But by design, their process is certainly not open. So I don't expect to see anything formally on that front.
Yeah.
Just from my own experience,
Yeah.
Iran is not Russia, but I think in some of these cases they often operate in similar ways, and these national security cases that an increasing number of countries are using is really just a way to deny due process and obscure a situation that's already pretty opaque. There was no evidence in my case.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, they presented what they claimed was smoking gun evidence from my emails. Oftentimes it was just a message between me and an editor or a friend back in the United States. I would often say when people ask me, what was the evidence against you? I said, the fact that I spoke English and had a Gmail account was enough to accuse me of anything that they wanted to. So I think we should just orient ourselves to understand that these are not normal legal proceedings.
Right.
This is not a court system in the United States or a similar country.
Very true. Somebody asked if you could request that you not be placed in a glass cage, but I think that's
just the system.
The system
It's
there.
just the system. It's against international norms. You don't want to identify somebody in that kind of fashion, but that's just the system that they have. And in this case, there's just no jury concept. It's a judge trial. So part of the reason is you don't want to, but there will be no jury at any point. So, any prejudice about having him in a glass cage, they would say doesn't exist because it's the judge that'll hear this case.
Right.
But it's inhumane and inappropriate and an outrage to see him in a glass cage.
Right. Exactly. Do you feel like that's one of the tools, Jason?
Yeah,
type of-
certainly. I mean,
yeah.
dehumanizing people is part and parcel of what these systems attempt to do. And again, I'd like to say that seeing Evan with his head held high and sort of almost a smirk on his face told me everything that I needed to know about who he is and also his understanding of the situation that he's going through.
Right. Yeah. I liked what you said, Daniel, about how he was. You liked seeing his hand gestures and everything like that. So, Paul, in general, how has the coverage been of Evan's story, and what countries besides the U.S. are following it most closely? Do you think?
I think the coverage of Evan's story has been very widespread and very good. We've tried since the beginning of this to highlight his predicament and the predicament of both other journalists in this situation and other people who have been wrongfully detained. So I think it has been comprehensive, and both journalistically and from an advocacy standpoint when it comes to press freedom issues. You saw the Journal, The Times, and the Washington Post do joint coordinated advertising around it. We saw, a lot of every network in this country and many networks in allied countries, in the UK, in Germany, in Japan, lots of other countries take a great interest in it. And hearteningly for us, not just at the beginning when it was news, but as this has progressed. So I think we have been encouraged and grateful for the amount of coverage it has received. I think the challenge for all of us is going to be maintaining that for as long as it takes until he is back and back to his family and back to the newsroom and back reporting. So I do feel, we've reached an altitude of coverage that has been extremely important, and now the importance is to maintain it.
Being a journalist with a lot of experience, can you tell us a little bit more? We talked about this a little bit, but how damaging is it to have something like this happen as far as people understanding what's going on in Russia, not only for the world, but also people in Russia who want their story told. And
I'm trying to think of analogies. It's very hard from here, but it was sort of as if you were trying to cover the United States now from bureaus of talented people with phones in Toronto and Mexico City. Right? I mean, the Russian press corps of foreign correspondents, which is typically, a lot of them are Evan's very good friends, but they were a young, dynamic cadre of people who have dedicated their careers to date to covering Russia. There may be a tiny number of them left in Russia, but I think you have seen satellite bureaus spring up in Berlin, Dubai, Warsaw, and other places to try and cover Russia from the outside, and they do a phenomenal job of it, but you can't replace having people on the ground every day immersed in that story, and then crucially being able to extract and synthesize that information in a way that people around the world here and elsewhere can really gain an understanding of what is happening there. And if you don't have that, again, with all due credit to everybody who's continuing to push into Russia virtually, really, to try and get that information, if you aren't there on the ground, you obviously lose something. And if you lose that, we've seen it happen. China's become a much tougher place to do business. The number of people reporting in China for international news outlets has dropped dramatically on the orders of the Chinese, in effect, by the restrictions that they place or the discouragement that they put on reporters there. So you wind up with the two countries that I would argue have a greater impact on the future of the West, in China and Russia, not knowing what's happening inside. Mm-hmm. And if you think about the dangers of distance being put between the West and those two countries, that's a vital link, and it's one that is really endangered of almost being severed entirely.
And how has the Wall Street Journal readers responded to Evan's situation?
Very well. I think readers, viewers, listeners of the Journal and a lot of other media outlets, including probably everybody here, have shown a great interest in it, and you see it on social media a lot. You see it in the celebrities that have promoted his cause and the cause of press freedom more broadly. And we've made a very conscious decision to keep it very highlighted. So on the 100th day last week, every copy of the Wall Street Journal, every print copy of the Wall Street Journal had Evan at 100 days as the front page on a wrapper, for the Journal. And we're certainly keeping it in front of our readers, but they have responded, as so many people have, in expressing support for him and for the cause.
And how is morale in the newsroom at the Wall Street Journal? And do you keep everyone up to date, have frequent briefings, or what is the process there?
Yeah, well, I think broadly speaking, we tried from the very beginning to be, to the best of our ability, the employer that you would want, or to act the way that you would want your employer to act if you were in Evan's situation. And that's sort of been the guiding light for us. We do try and keep the staff informed very regularly through calls, both with our staff and with other interested journalists. There's a group of Evan's friends who have been very active and very helpful and very positive, and we're in close touch with them. And I think maybe because we're a journalistic organization, a lot of what we've tried to orient ourselves towards is action, right? You don't want to be in a situation where you're sitting there wondering what we are doing and if we are doing enough and what is it that, why aren't we doing anything? Those are sort of unacceptable questions in those situations. So we're very conscious of wanting to do things and take action that gives people a sense that this has some momentum and is top of mind, as would be for any of our reporters anywhere in the world where safety and security and these huge issues are at play. So we've been conscious of that. We do a lot of internal briefings. We have a tweet storm every Wednesday at 10:30 to try and highlight this, which a lot of people then pick up on. We do a lot of internal communications on it, and we hope that people feel it very directly. I think it's, Evan joined us in early 2000, or just right at the end of 2021. So we were very lucky to get him. Obviously, so much was happening at the time and has happened since that he's spent time in the London bureau, but he hadn't had a chance to really get to know colleagues in New York or Washington or elsewhere. So it was very important for us that everybody everywhere in the newsroom felt viscerally that they had a stake in this, and that that this there but for the grace of God, really.
I'll just add, our Emma Tucker, our editor-in-chief, has regular briefings for the newsroom, and then Almar Latour, our CEO, does it for the kind of company-wide. And I do think there's this element of trying to communicate. You don't over-communicate, because there isn't a ton you can always say. There's a lot of what we're working on that has to sort of, by design, stay private behind the scenes. But as Paul said, somebody early on said, you need to work on this like it's your own brother who's been taken. And that has stayed with me sort of every day. And I think that's what people want to see in this kind of scenario when things go wrong, because you can't prevent everything from going wrong. Things happen, but how do you react to it? What's the approach that you take? And we've tried to be as conscious as we can of that. And it's not perfect. You make mistakes and you figure it out and you do better next time. So that's what we're trying to do.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah, of course.
I think I told Paul this the second or third time that we met, that I give the Journal an A- on this. Doing a phenomenal job, but there's always room for improvement. And over these last 100 or so days, the ramping up of messaging, the consistency, the learning, right, has been really an incredible thing for me as someone who was the subject of one of these campaigns. It's been great to watch, and I think so much has been learned over these last few years, and I think we should feel comfortable in it. To me, as someone outside the organization looking, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, you know the kind of case that's in front of your eyes. And I haven't seen any sort of flinching from the Journal, and that's been so heartening and encouraging as a journalist when I've had friends who work at the Journal ask me, how are we doing? How is our company doing? As both Paul and Jay indicated, they can't tell us everything. Right. But the sense that I get is that no rock is being left unturned. And I really admire that.
Yes, I totally agree with you on that. Yeah. Danielle, so can you tell me what your feelings are about how everyone's been responding to this crisis, and also how do you manage the demands of your job and this family crisis you're going through right now?
Well, I'm really grateful to my job. They've been really great to me. So, and going to work, it helps give me some stability so that I can just have something to focus on. I'm sorry, what was the first part of the question?
How do you feel, what is your feeling about the response that the Wall Street Journal and other entities have had to this, what's happened?
I'm so grateful. I know we wouldn't be able to do it without this amazing outpouring of support. Everyone at the Wall Street Journal has been so kind and so wonderful. It's a really tough position to be in because you have to steel yourself to know that it's going to be a long time and you don't really know what is coming next. Right now we just have, we passed the 100-day marker, and seeing Evan's face in the news was just really heartening. At such a dark time, it's wonderful to see his face again. So it's kind of like that day to day, week to week. You're just reading headlines and just kind of living in hope, and we're so grateful. Wall Street Journal is doing everything they can to keep him in the spotlight.
Do you have like regular updates, news updates that you try to find out what's happening, or?
Yeah, I just read headlines. I read the news as much as I can, but that's pretty much it. That's as much as I know.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about his. It sounds like when you were talking about Evan as a sibling, that he was very curious and lively. When he decided to become a journalist, do you remember like when he decided to become a journalist, and were you surprised by that, or was it like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense? Or
Yeah, I think it makes sense. It started to make sense more and more to me because there was a period of time where he was kind of unsure of what he wanted to do.
Like always?
Yeah, me too. And it was, but everything he was doing was so fearless. He loved traveling. He was making friends all over the world. He worked as a chef for a little bit. So, and he'd come home and then he'd go to California or go visit friends in New York. So putting that all together and his incredible work ethic and drive and love of people, it makes perfect sense. He was kind of born to be a reporter. So yeah, looking back on it now, it's like, of course.
Of course, right.
Yeah,
that's great. Okay. Let's see. Several questions you all have answered. Okay, Jason, you have been outspoken about the need for journalists to not repeat the false charges made by hostage takers. Can you tell us, why that is and share your strategy?
Yeah, so, when I came back, I spent a lot of time unpacking my own story, right? Reporting it out for the book that I wrote. And I saw, a consistency in the early headlines of my case. Washington Post reporter arrested and charged with espionage in Iran. And, viscerally, years after the fact, it made me very angry. And I would see this repeated every time we saw a case of an American who was taken hostage, whether it was in Iran or China, or Russia, Venezuela, and these accusations. I think by putting them in our headlines, unconsciously, or maybe in what I would say is kind of a lazy way, we're giving some credence to those charges, right? And every time I would bring this up with an editor or a fellow reporter who wrote one of these stories, they would say, well, we have to put the fact, the most important piece of news in the headline. As someone who's been in that position before, the false charge of me being espionage isn't the thing that I want the world to know.
Right.
I want the world to know that I've been wrongly detained. I have been taken hostage. I am sitting in jail because I'm an American citizen. And I think, we're shifting in how we look at this, and I think I'm convincing people that we have to be smarter about how we frame these stories. And even actually, I will say, in the first case that I wrote about Evan's arrest, I got some pushback from one of my own editors saying, nobody believes that Evan's a spy. Well, you and I don't believe Evan's a spy. His bosses know he's not a spy. His family knows he's not a spy. His captors know he's not a spy. But we live in a country where the rule of law is the framework with which we operate. And there are 350 million of us living here, and most of us will never go to a place like Russia or Iran or China. And we don't realize that in those countries, they weaponize their legal system against innocent people, like Evan, like me. And so we have to do a better job of explaining for the public. And I'll just give you a brief example. That first day that Evan was arrested, and that was sort of the predominant headline, American reporter charged with espionage in Russia. I read so many stories. It was so disheartening because you read the stories and you realize, okay, you know, these people have done their due diligence, but the majority of folks don't get past the headline. And then I sat in an Uber, and there was, you know, a talk radio station on, and it was part of the, you know, the kind of top of the hour headlines that they read. And, you know, for the average person, more people are listening to talk radio or watching the crawl on Fox or CNN than they are reading our newspapers. So we have to do a better job of, you know, sort of setting the agenda right off the bat, because that headline is really just stenography for the captor, right? We're doing their dirty work for them. And so I will always push back against that. And I hope that others are listening, and when they write their stories, they will frame it in a different kind of way, right at the top.
Well, it's definitely brought a discussion to Axios, I'll tell you that, as
Good.
soon as it So before I ask the last question, I did want to say thank you for everyone for coming. This is one of several events that we'll have focused on Evan. For instance, next week, starting at 8 a.m. on Wednesday, July 19th, the Wall Street Journal and the National Press Club will host a 24-hour international readathon of Evan's work. I can't think of any other way that we can emphasize what great journalism he has already done. And we have done this before, and it can be an incredibly uplifting experience for both participators and those watching online. We expect to hold a satellite media tour in a broadcast center soon, which will allow various TV and radio organizations around the world to interview Evan's team. We've created an online petition for Evan on change.org and hope you all sign this. Later this fall, we will recognize Evan as our Aubuchon Award honoree for an American journalist. I hope to give that to him in person. This is one of our highest awards and is something that our entire community looks forward to every year. We are also planning for the fall a virtual run for Evan and Austin Tice, who is the other American journalist being unjustly detained overseas. We hope to get runners in all 50 states and many international countries. Thank you again to Danielle, Paul, Jay, and Jason for joining us. Thanks to the NPC and Wall Street Journal staff who set up this event, and to Bill McCarran for helping organize it. And after we're all done, we will, if for those who are interested, we will take a photo from the balcony of people holding signs for I Stand With Evan. Okay, and then the last question is for Danielle. So tell us what you want, like when he does get home, what is the one thing you want to do with him the most in Philadelphia or wherever it is? So.
Yeah. Well, first I'm going to hug him so hard he won't be able to breathe. But yeah, I'd love to do one of my mom started a tradition to do these family vacations, just insisted that anytime you come home, we have a vacation all together. So I'd love to do that. And my dad's going to bring the whole grocery store with him. And he and Evan will cook up an amazing dinner. And I'd love to have a beer with him.
Aw, that sounds great. That's great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.